Shouting stones. What are they? Why would stones shout? Today's story ends with Jesus talking about stones shouting and crying out. You see, these stones have a story to tell, and Jesus lets it be known. If people keep quiet, well, then the stones, symbolic of the whole of creation, will shout out and tell the story, one they know well. Today's journey into Jerusalem tells of a spontaneous celebration. It was time for folks from all over our country and all over the countryside there to gather in Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. People were festive and maybe even keeping an eye out for family and friends as people entered town. But suddenly coming into Jerusalem from the east gate, coming from the Mount of Olives, they saw Jesus coming and riding on a donkey. He didn't come in having conquered any land or with shiny glowing weapons. No army to protect and create power and control over others. In fact, Jesus rode in on the lowliest of lowly, a donkey. A humbling act no king would ever do. Yet Jesus had conquered lots, just not the way and by the way of an army. Yet in the midst of it, many were not sure about what they were seeing. Here, the one they thought came to save them, to be the new ruler, leader. Well, he came riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. That's right, a donkey. Used to carry goods or people of low stature. Where's the horse? Shouldn't he be riding a horse? After all, horses were symbols of power and might. He is our new mighty ruler, our Messiah, isn't he? While this was happening, on the opposite side of town, on the west side, coming in through the west gate, the Roman king was entering Jerusalem at the same time, with a parade to demonstrate his military prowess, reveling in victory after conquering another territory. He rode in on a horse, symbolic of power and might, and truly about intimidation and control by the political empire. Boy, as I'm sharing that, it sounds and looks familiar to what's going on in Ukraine. Here, poor onlookers would be pushed back by the wealthy, so they would have the best seats, the best views of this successful army. Their dazzling swords and armor, spears and chariots. What a spectacle. But this wasn't the only reason the Roman king, Pontius Pilate, came riding into Jerusalem this day with troops. Remember, it's Passover. And thousands of people were flocking from all over the country to this town for the feast and celebration. Passover was a reminder to the Jewish people of the time that God saved them, saved the Israelites from the oppression of the Egyptians. The king didn't want the people to get any ideas about freedom. This show of force would keep them in their place. Control had to be kept, and who better to keep things under control than the Roman army overseen by Pontius Pilate himself. Jesus rode in on a donkey, hailed by folks throwing down in front of them their cloaks, their robes, and anything they had, since this was a spontaneous event. And the crowds cried out, "Blessed, blessed, blessed," as he came. Many had heard the stories of his healing of the unclean, the woman, the leper, and paralytic, of Jesus telling them, "Blessed are the poor, the hungry, and those who weep," and other stories of how he preached for all to love their enemies, the numerous parables, and how he fed 5,000 with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. The people looked to him to save them, to bring them peace, and believed he was the one who could win it for them because they needed his help. They wanted the Roman Empire to be ousted from power over them, but this Jesus hadn't seemed to show them he was up to doing that. Still, there were murmurs in the air by many who could not handle this Jesus who brought healing, associated and ate with the poor and the outcast, and raised Lazarus from the dead. Jesus comes after teaching to turn the other cheek, bringing in a bunch of fishermen as his disciples, and tax collectors and common weaponless folks following him. Pontius Pilate comes amidst warriors. Now, maybe the final straw. Jesus riding into town on a donkey, not a show of strength, but one of humbleness, definitely not becoming a king. So yes, if the stones could shout out, they would tell the story of two kings, two very different ways of leading and very different messages. One of power, control, intimidation, and domination. The other who preaches turning the other cheek, loving your neighbor, including the poor and the outcast and the sinners. Two coming in from opposite sides of the city through the main gates toward each other. Will they meet? Will they collide? Yes, collide they will, for it was predicted by some of the Pharisees, especially ones who begged Jesus, who implored him to silence his followers, the followers who were calling out, "Blessed is the King." They didn't want to create a scene to attract the Romans, especially Pontius Pilate, for he might see what's going on as an insurrection and take action immediately. But no need to worry, for Pontius Pilate was already up to something. He wasn't there to understand them, but instead to alienate them and threaten them. He placed gold shields of Roman deities in the temple itself. Thus, a major insult to the Jewish religion. Both Pilate and Jesus stirred the pot. Pilate by proclaiming supreme Roman authority, and Jesus in his own way by challenging the authority through asserting the authority of God and putting forth another law, a law to love one another at whatever the cost. The stones are calling out to you and I. You see, over the past 10 to 25 years, and maybe a little longer, I've lost track the older I get, we've gotten too quiet, too drawn away from Holy Week. too drawn away from Lent and its meaning for our journey of faith as people of faith. We aren't hearing the stories every year. We aren't remembering and sharing the story of Jesus leading up to and into Jerusalem. We aren't sharing his entry, the betrayal, the so-called trial by the people, and the journey to the cross and the cross event itself. And least or most of all, I'm not sure, we've even stopped coming to hear the story of resurrection on Easter morning. Many Christians go through Lenten Sundays, much like every other Sunday. They might get there, they might not. Many don't gather for a time of shared reflection for Ash Wednesday or the other Wednesdays during Lent. For some, they even miss Palm Sunday and go directly to Easter. Others come to Palm Sunday, then jump right past everything else happening that week to Easter Sunday. Bypassing Maundy, Thursday, the Last Supper, and betrayal, and Good Friday, the crucifixion. Jumping directly to the resurrection. And still others, they skip it all and maybe come to celebrate the resurrection itself. Yet you and I, all of us, are the eyes, the ears, the hands, and the feet for Jesus and God in our world today. And if we don't come and take part, if we don't hear again and again the stories of our faith leading Jesus down this road and walk through it again and again ourselves, who is going to speak aloud today or tomorrow? Who's going to tell the stories we so desperately need to hear? If not us, then the stones will have to shout it out because we, the people, are silent. The stones will tell the story of the Last Supper, sharing of the bread of life and the cup of salvation, of the true humbleness of Jesus kneeling down and washing the dirty, stinky feet of the disciples, something no king would ever do. Yet Jesus does it. They would tell how Judas was overtaken by Satan, of Jesus teaching the disciples the most powerful commandment no other king would ever teach, to love one another, just as Jesus loves them, and that others will know who they are by their love. The stones would also tell us about how in Herod's palace, an innocent man was being sentenced to death for living out a gospel of love. How cruelly he was treated, beaten, and made to carry the cross on his own. Golgotha stones would cry out, telling how Jesus cried out loud to God, asking God to forgive those who were crucifying him. Friends, if you and I are silent, if we don't tell the story, which begins with Palm Sunday, all of creation, including the stones, will shout out. But we will tell the story, at least part of it this week. Maundy, Thursday, we'll be reading a passion story. And we'll be having some reflection about the disciples' actions. And we'll be praying and maybe even shedding some tears for what Jesus is going through. But the tears will not last, for good news is on the way. Now, we won't be here on Good Friday, but I hope if you're able to, you can search out a place to go. But let's gather this Thursday and bring others along. Let's gather and tell it together. Won't you come and gather with us for soup and bread and a time of hearing the story again? Come. Share this time with Jesus and his Last Supper.